Every day, Ethan handed over his pocket money to his teacher, thinking it was normal, until his father slipped something unexpected into his backpack that changed everything. Like, subscribe, and share for more inspiring tales. The boy's name was Ethan, a quiet kid who went to school every day like any other 12-year-old. He lived with his father, Mark, in a small house just outside town. Ethan's mother had passed away years earlier, so it was just the two of them. Mark worked long hours at a warehouse, but he always made sure Ethan had what he needed. Lunch for school, a few dollars in his pocket for small things, and a backpack to carry his books. Ethan didn't talk much about school. He'd come home, do his homework, and help his dad with chores. That was their routine. Ethan's teacher, Mr. Hargrove, had been at the school for over a decade. He taught math to the sixth graders, including Ethan's class. Mr. Hargrove was strict, the kind of teacher who didn't let kids mess around. He'd call out anyone who didn't pay attention, and he had a way of making students feel small if they stepped out of line. Most of the kids didn't like him, but they didn't say much. He was just part of the day, like the chipped desk or the flickering lights in the classroom. What nobody knew, at least not at first, was that Mr. Hargrove had started taking Ethan's pocket money. It began a few months into the school year. Ethan would walk into class with a couple of dollars his dad had given him, maybe for a snack after school or a drink from the vending machine. But by the end of the day, that money was gone. Not because Ethan spent it, but because Mr. Hargrove took it. The first time it happened, Ethan didn't know what to say. Mr. Hargrove had called him to the front of the room after the bell rang. The other kids were already filing out, grabbing their bags and heading to the buses. Mr. Hargrove looked at Ethan and said he needed to check his pockets. Ethan didn't understand why, but he pulled out the $2 his dad had given him that morning. Mr. Hargrove took the money, folded it, and slipped it into his own pocket. He told Ethan it was a fine for not paying attention in class. Ethan hadn't been distracted, though. He'd been working on his fractions like everyone else. But he didn't argue. He just nodded and left. After that, it kept happening, not every day at first, but often enough that Ethan started to expect it. Mr. Hargrove would find a reason. Sometimes it was for not participating enough, sometimes for forgetting to raise his hand. Once he said it was because Ethan's desk was messy, even though it wasn't. Ethan would hand over the dollar or two he had, and Mr. Hargrove would take it without a word. It wasn't much, just pocket change. But for Ethan, it was what his dad worked hard to give him. He didn't tell anyone about it. He didn't want his dad to worry, and he didn't think anyone at school would believe him. Mr. Hargrove was the teacher after all. Weeks turned into months, and the routine settled in. Ethan would go to school with a couple dollars, and by the time he got home, they'd be gone. He stopped buying snacks. He stopped getting drinks from the machine. If his dad asked why he didn't use the money, Ethan would say he wasn't hungry or that he'd forgotten. Mark didn't push it. He figured Ethan was just being careful with what he had. But Ethan wasn't careful. He was scared. Not of Mr. Hargrove hurting him, but of what might happen if he said no. The teacher had a way of looking at him, a cold stare that made Ethan feel like he'd done something wrong, even when he hadn't. So he kept quiet, handed over the money, and went on with his day. It wasn't like he had a lot to begin with, but losing it every time wore him down. He started to dread math class, not because of the subject, but because of what came after. Mark didn't notice anything unusual at first. Ethan was good at hiding it. He'd come home, say school was fine, and sit down to do his homework. Mark would ask how his day went, and Ethan would give the same short answers. Nothing special, just the usual. Mark trusted him. He had no reason not to. He was busy keeping the bills paid and food on the table, and Ethan had never been the type to cause trouble. That changed one evening in early March. Ethan came home quieter than usual. Mark was in the kitchen, heating up some leftovers, when he noticed Ethan didn't say much. He asked how school was, and Ethan just shrugged. Mark pressed a little, asking if something was wrong. Ethan hesitated, then said he lost his money again. Mark frowned. It wasn't the first time Ethan had mentioned losing it, but Mark had always assumed it fell out of his pocket or got misplaced in his backpack. Kids lose things, he thought. It happens. But this time, Ethan's voice cracked when he said it. Mark put down the plate he was holding and looked at him. Ethan wouldn't meet his eyes. Mark asked what he meant by loss, and Ethan mumbled something about it being gone before he could use it. Mark didn't let it go. He sat down across from Ethan and told him to explain. Ethan didn't want to. He tried to brush it off, but Mark kept his tone steady and said he needed to know. Finally, Ethan told him. He said Mr. Hargrove had been taking his money, not just once, but almost every day for months. He explained how it started, how the teacher would call him up after class and take whatever he had. Ethan said he didn't know why, just that Mr. Hargrove always had a reason, even if it didn't make sense. Mark listened, his hands tightening into fists on the table. Ethan finished talking and looked down, waiting for his dad to say something. But Mark didn't yell. He didn't get mad at Ethan. He asked if Ethan had told anyone else, another teacher, the principal, a friend. Ethan shook his head. He said he didn't think anyone would believe him, and he didn't want to make it worse. Mark nodded, processing it. He told Ethan to go do his homework and that he'd handle it. Ethan didn't argue. He grabbed his backpack and went to his room. Mark sat there for a while, thinking. He couldn't believe a teacher would do something like that, taking money from a kid day after day. But Ethan wasn't a liar. Mark knew his son. If Ethan said it was happening, it was happening. The question was what to do about it. He could go to the school, talk to the principal, file a complaint. But Mark didn't trust systems like that. He dealt with enough bureaucracy at work to know how slow things moved, how people protected their own. He needed proof, something solid, before he walked into that school and accused anyone. That's when he got the idea. Mark wasn't a tech guy, but he knew enough to figure something out. He remembered a small voice recorder he bought years ago for a work training session. It was still in a drawer somewhere, probably with some old batteries. He dug through the house that night, found it, and tested it. The thing still worked, barely audible, but clear enough. It was tiny, about the size of a key fob, with a little button to start and stop recording. Mark figured it could fit in Ethan's backpack without anyone noticing. The next morning, Mark didn't tell Ethan the whole plan. He didn't want him to feel pressured. He just said he put something in his backpack to help figure things out. Ethan asked what it was, and Mark showed him the recorder. He explained how it worked. Press the button once to start, again to stop. He told Ethan to turn it on before math class and leave it running until he got home. Ethan looked nervous, but he nodded. Mark gave him $2, same as always, and sent him off to school. Ethan went through his day like usual. He kept the backpack close, the recorder tucked into a side pocket with his pencils. When math class rolled around, he reached in, pressed a button, and let it run. Mr. Hargrove taught the lesson. Something about decimals, and Ethan sat there trying to focus. The bell rang, and the other kids started packing up. Sure enough, Mr. Hargrove called Ethan to the front. Ethan walked up, the backpack still on his shoulder. Mr. Hargrove asked what he had in his pockets. Ethan pulled out the $2 and handed them over. Mr. Hargrove said it was for not showing his work on the homework, even though Ethan had turned in every problem. The teacher took the money, put it in his pocket, and told Ethan to go. Ethan left, the recorder still running. When Ethan got home, Mark was waiting. Ethan handed him the backpack, and Mark pulled out the recorder. He stopped it, rewound it, played it back. The audio was muffled at first, just classroom noise, kids talking, Mr. Hargrove going on about decimals. But then it got clearer. You could hear Mr. Hargrove's voice, sharp and direct, asking for the money. You could hear Ethan's quiet response, the rustle of the bills, and Mr. Hargrove's excuse about the homework. It was all there. Mark listened to it twice, making sure he hadn't missed anything. Ethan watched him, saying nothing. Mark turned off the recorder and looked at his son. He asked if that's how it always went, and Ethan said yes. Mark didn't say much after that. He told Ethan to get ready for dinner and started thinking about what came next. The next day, Mark called in sick to work. He took the recorder, put it in his jacket, and drove to the school. He didn't have an appointment, but he didn't care. He walked into the front office and asked to see the principal, Mrs. Carter. The secretary tried to tell him he needed to schedule something, but Mark wasn't having it. He said it was urgent and that he wasn't leaving until he talked to someone. The secretary relented and buzzed Mrs. Carter. Mrs. Carter came out a few minutes later. She was a tall woman, always dressed in business suits, with a no-nonsense way about her. She asked Mark what was going on. He didn't waste time. He told her about Mr. Hargrove, about the money, about how it had been going on for months. Mrs. Carter's face didn't change much, but she listened. Mark said he had proof and pulled out the recorder. He played it for her. right there in the office. The audio filled the room. Mr. Hargrove's voice, Ethan's hesitant replies, the whole exchange. Mrs. Carter didn't interrupt. When it finished, she asked if Ethan had given permission to be recorded. Mark said he had, that it was his idea to help his son. Mrs. Carter nodded and said she'd need to look into it. She asked Mark to leave the recorder with her. He didn't like that, but he agreed, as long as she promised to act on it. Mark left the school and went home. He didn't tell Ethan what happened, not yet. He wanted to be sure something would come of it. The next day, Ethan went to school as usual. Mark waited for a call, but nothing came. By the afternoon, he was starting to think he'd made a mistake trusting Mrs. Carter. He was about to head back to the school when his phone rang. It was Mrs. Carter. She said she'd spoken to Mr. Hargrove and that he'd admitted to taking the money. She didn't go into details, just said it was being handled and that Ethan wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. Mark asked what that meant. Mrs. Carter said Mr. Hargrove was on leave, effective immediately, and that the school board would decide what happened next. He apologized, said it shouldn't have happened, and promised to follow up. Mark hung up and sat there processing it. He didn't feel relieved, not yet. He wanted to know why Mr. Hargrove had done it, how long it had been going on, whether other kids were involved, but for now, it was over for Ethan. When Ethan got home, Mark told him Mr. Hargrove wouldn't be his teacher anymore. Ethan didn't say much, just nodded. Mark gave him $2 and told him to keep it this time. Word got around the school eventually. Some kids said Mr. Hargrove had left town. Others said he'd been fired. The school never made an official statement, but a substitute took over Ethan's math class for the rest of the year. Ethan didn't talk about it much after that. He started using his pocket money again, buying a soda or a snack every now and then. Mark kept an eye on him, checking in more often, making sure nothing else was going on. The recorder stayed in Mark's drawer, unused but not forgotten. He didn't know if he'd ever need it again, but he was glad he'd had it that day. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about Ethan, about making sure he didn't have to go through something like that again. And for Ethan, it was about knowing his dad had his back no matter what.